Before we get started, I would love to give a shout out to September's new Patreon members: Trevor W., the Lake Lucy Murder Mystery Guild ladies, Laura T., Rebecca M., Jess W., and Kim F. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast on Patreon. You're the best. Welcome to Murder Road Trip. I'm your host, Haley. Joining me on today's road trip is Mike Brown. Mike is the host of the Pleasing Terrors podcast. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about Pleasing Terrors?
Hi, Haley. Thank you for having me on the show. Pleasing Terrors is a podcast where I tell stories that are a mixture of paranormal, true crime, history, folklore, and it's just creepy stories wrapped in a lot of history.
I love your show so much. It's so creepy, but you're such a good storyteller. It's unfair how good you are.
Oh, thank you.
Mike did an episode on H.H. Holmes. I think it's 24.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about the castle and where it was located, which is now a post office. And then you also did a really amazing episode on Count Dracula. Those are just a few of the episodes you've done.
Yes, I've listened to your episode though on H.H. Holmes, and I was blown away because you seem to know a lot more about it than I do. I was really amazed by how much you know about H.H. Holmes.
The problem with H.H. Holmes is that there are so many different accounts out there that it's hard to know what really happened and what is just become folklore.
Oh yeah, with any of the old stories like that, especially someone as infamous as him, there's going to be lots of folklore added onto the history.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the thing I was most surprised about with the castle was that the castle is actually not on the exact spot of the post office. It's actually just a little bit to the side of it. That was something that I didn't realize until I was researching the episode. I always wanted to go to that post office though, just to see it.
I know I went to Chicago about a year ago and we went on a haunted tour. We didn't go on the Devil in the White City one, but they were talking about how they only go to that area during the day because it's not located in a really great part of town.
Yes.
I was like, how fun would it be to go there at night?
Yeah, that would be, even just a drive through, I think would be, I would love to see it.
And then you also did an episode where you stayed the night in an abandoned building. I can't remember exactly. It's been a while.
Yeah, the old city jail in Charleston is this super creepy jail. It's not exactly abandoned. It's empty. They only use it for tours at the moment, but it is super creepy. It dates back to the early 1800s, and it was a place that was used to house someone who is sort of our local version of H.H. Holmes, a woman named Lavinia Fisher, who is accused of being a serial killer, and there's a lot of infamous legends surrounding her. And the building is very creepy, and it was a long, disturbing night staying there by myself.
I'm creeped out even thinking about it. I am the opposite of you. I could never handle it. I get so scared about everything.
Yeah, it was. Everybody says that.
I just want to say that what I love about your show the most is that it's like Halloween 24/7, 365. Like, you're not just doing creepy stories during the month of October. It's so great to be able to just have a podcast where we can live that all year round. And you're such a great storyteller, like I said. I'm so happy to have you on the show. I feel very lucky.
Oh no, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. Where can listeners find you in Pleasing Terrors?
Well, pretty much anywhere you would normally go to listen to a podcast, you can find Pleasing Terrors, and you can also find me on Facebook at Pleasing Terrors, and there's also a Pleasing Terrors group called Terrified that is a place where the listeners to the show can hang out and ask questions and make suggestions and just talk with each other. And then I'm also on Twitter at Pleasing Terrors.
Great. I would definitely take a look at his pages and like them because Mike posts really awesome pictures when he's giving tours, and it's always the highlight of my evening to see your tour pictures, and they're always gorgeous. I love it.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Mike and I had a difficult time deciding which snacks to eat on our road trip. So there are so many Halloween snacks out there. I sent him a list, and we decided to just get rid of one of the items on the list because peeps are gross, and we were like, we don't need those on there. So we decided to have three snacks, and we're going to snack on Dove Halloween Milk Chocolate Ghosts, Sweet Tart Skulls and Bones, and Haribo Halloween Ghostly Gummies as we make our way to Stull, Kansas to discuss the Stull Cemetery. Mike, what have you heard in the past about the Stull Cemetery?
Well, the Stull Cemetery, from everything that I've read, sounds like a really creepy place. I would so love to spend the night there. I wish you could. They would still let people go and get into the graveyard. But there are so many creepy stories about it. It has so many legends attached to it. It's really incredible.
That is one thing that really upsets people that love this kind of thing. Like they love to go ghost hunting or they just love, to go to places that are full of legend. But like you said, they don't let people even go to the graveyard, even though it's a graveyard. So maybe people want to visit, like, heads, the graves and things. But it is creepy. I actually didn't know anything about Stull Cemetery growing up, even though I grew up just a short distance away from it. I've driven through Stull so many times, and the town is kind of creepy when you drive through. It's extremely small. The cemetery is right off the road, like, drive by it all the time, and I just thought it was a normal cemetery. But I definitely got like a weird feeling every time we drove through the town. The cemetery that I heard about the most growing up was not Stull, but it was Rochester Cemetery, which is in northern Topeka. When I was talking to my stepmom about the podcast, she said, "Oh my gosh, you have to cover Stull." And so I messaged Mike and I was like, "Have you heard about this cemetery?" And he said, "Oh, I was just talking about it last night." And so then I knew if Mike Brown knew about it, then it must be legit.
Yeah, it seems to be pretty famous. Well, it's famous all over the country, but it is, I guess, especially famous to people in Kansas who are interested in the paranormal. Because whenever I get someone from Kansas on the tour, they always mention Stull.
Oh, wow. My stepmom said that when she was growing up, she heard about it and she even drove there at night one time because she wanted to see the supposed devil worshippers. And she said she got so scared that she made her friends turn around. She said she saw like lights everywhere, like really scary lights, which I've heard other people talk about before. But there are no lights there. So she said, I don't know where these lights were coming from. And it just scared her so much that she just had to go.
Well, there used to be big gatherings of people, especially on Halloween at Stull Cemetery. So many people would show up that they would outnumber the people that actually lived in Stull. And they would have to have sheriffs come out and sort of keep an eye on everybody. And one of the weird things about it is they would allow people to visit the cemetery and they would allow them to just stand there until about 11:30 at night, and then they would make them leave. And that was something that that's one of those things that just causes people to be even more suspicious, because it's like, why would you allow us to be here at this place on Halloween night, which is one of the important nights with the mythology of Stull, and then just before all the creepy stuff is supposed to happen, you make us go away.
Right, it is very suspicious.
Hmm.
Well, on that note, are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
What's the station again?
Keep trying.
Hold on. Let me try this one.
Stop. That's it. Turn it up. Turn it up. Before we get into the legend of Stull Cemetery, I want to give a bit of background on the town, church, and cemetery. Stull is an incorporated Kansas town of around 20 people. I couldn't find the exact population, but I know it's really small. There's like 3 houses when you drive through. It's very tiny. The town Stull is located between 2 larger Kansas cities, Lawrence and Topeka, and the cemetery is right off the North 1600 road. So, like I said, you're driving through on this main road, and it's as you're driving, it's literally right off the road. Stull, Kansas was founded in the 1850s by families with German and Pennsylvania Dutch roots. In 1857, a stone church was erected on the north side of town. It was named Evangelical Emmanuel Church. A few years later, the land surrounding the church was donated by a townsperson. The surrounding land was to be used as a cemetery, and this is often referred to as a churchyard. Now, I was a little creeped out about the idea of a church being surrounded by a cemetery, so I looked into it, and it's actually pretty common. I guess I don't know much about churches or cemeteries because I thought it was weird, but I guess it's not.
Well, I can tell you in Charleston, pretty much all of the churches have a graveyard right around them.
Oh my
And
God.
I don't know if it's true, but one of the things that they always say is that the difference between a graveyard and a cemetery is that a graveyard is attached to a church and a cemetery is separated from a church and is off by itself.
Oh, that's very interesting. Well, I looked into churchyards, and I guess they were really common in Europe, which would make sense why they would come to Stull because Stull was created by Europeans. And they were really popular in the 19th century and eventually made their way to America in the 1830s. And like I said, it was not uncommon for a cemetery to have a church located on its grounds. And like you said, almost every church in Charleston has a cemetery around it. All right, now on to the good stuff.
For many years, it has been rumored that the townspeople of Stull practiced witchcraft. And those rumors are, I think, much to the annoyance of the people that live in Stull. It's kind of one of those things where the people in Stull, from what I've read, are kind of resentful at some of the attention that, especially this kind of attention that's being thrown their way. And so they're a bit standoffish. And so it's hard to tell exactly what's going on in Stull, but the people in Stull officially do not like the stories that are told about their town and their church and their graveyard. And of course, the most prominent story is that Stull is a center of witchcraft. There is a large cemetery there, and according to legend, there was a pine tree that was growing up in this cemetery, and there was a tombstone growing out of it. And supposedly, witches we used to dance around the tree. And then the other story too is that the tree was used as a gallows where witches would actually be hanged at one point.
Wow. And you're totally right about the citizens of Stull. They absolutely hate the legends. A lot of the time when you drive by, the people who live in like the 3 houses that are in Stull just sit on their porches and just watch. It's like they're just waiting to call the police. They don't like it, and I guess I can't blame them, if everyone thinks they practice witchcraft.
Well, can you imagine? Stull is labeled as one of the 7 gateways to hell. Can you imagine if somebody walks up to your house and it says, "So, I hear you live at the gateway to hell." I could see where people would get a little irritated by that after a while. But the stories about Stull get even creepier and more disturbing than just a bunch of witches dancing around a tree. According to one of the legends, one of those witches had an affair with the devil himself, and she became pregnant with a child that was half witch or half human and half demon. And supposedly when the child was born, it was sort of a werewolf. It was a baby covered in hair. And the baby was said to have only lived a few days. That when it died, it was buried in the Stull cemetery. And that when its mother, the witch who had had the affair with the devil, died, she supposedly was buried there as well. There is actually a tombstone in the cemetery in Stull that reads witch. It's spelled a little differently. It's Wittich. But people have always assumed that that's the grave of the mother of this deformed child. Even though the mother and the baby died, according to the legend, the devil returns to the cemetery twice a year to visit their grave. And supposedly, and this is, I think, for me, one of the creepier parts of the story, there is a staircase that's next to the church that is supposed to lead down to hell. That's how the devil comes up to the cemetery.
Yeah, that's really scary to me as well, and especially when we're going to talk about the stairs later and what people say about them. That is really creepy to think about, that the devil can just walk up these stairs and boom, he's in this little town and he's visiting the graves.
You talk about it, it sounds silly. But can you imagine going there to the graveyard, especially at night, and walking over to where the church is and seeing a staircase? I mean, how terrifying would that be?
Oh, definitely.
The devil is said to return to the cemetery twice a year. Once is the spring equinox, but the other night that the devil is supposed to come back is coming up in just a few days, and it is, of course, Halloween. According to the stories, when the devil is not visiting the graves of his loved ones, that cemetery is also, according to legend, and again, I'm sure the people of Stull hate these legends, supposedly it's used for human sacrifice and occult rituals and gatherings of Satanists. And those who have attended these events say that, and others who have just gone there at night just to see it, have described having a lot of weird things happen while they're there. I think one of the most interesting things is that people sometimes have gone there to the cemetery at night and then they just sort of snap to a little bit later with no memory of where they've been or what they've been doing. The last thing they remember was going to the graveyard, and then it's like their brain just shut down.
Now, can you explain that a little bit? Is that a common occurrence for people in the paranormal field?
It's not a common occurrence with regard to haunted places and ghost stories. Memory loss is more something that you hear about with UFO encounters. This is maybe the first time I've heard about memory loss in association with a graveyard. But another really weird thing I came across when I was researching some of the details of Stull Cemetery. For example, there was another story of someone who goes into the graveyard at night and they start seeing things and hearing things and they get freaked out. So they basically run back to their car, and when they get to the road, the car is on a different side of the road from where they parked, and it's turned around facing the other direction. And so that was a weird incident too, because that's something that I've never heard of happening with a ghost encounter before.
Oh, that's so creepy. I can't imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And like we said earlier, there's no lights. This is a dark area, so not only are you in the dark, but you head back to your car where you're most likely going to feel safe, and then your car is not where you left it.
Well, and that to me is creepier than just hearing a noise or seeing a strange light or anything like that. Is that if you're in a place and all of a sudden reality starts breaking down, it's like all of a sudden things are not working the way they're supposed to. And I just think that the idea of that's really terrifying. Now, there are a lot of weird things that are said to go on in the Stull Cemetery. There are weird noises when people are there. One of the more common things people talk about is you can be there by yourself and it will feel like someone grabs you. I mean, can you imagine that if you were there at night and, like you said, there's no lights and you can't see anything, and all of a sudden you feel hands on you and you spin around and there's no one there. You're still all by yourself. That would just be absolutely terrifying.
No, I'd leave. I'd be like, I'm gone.
And then there's one of the things that really tends to scare people is what they call the wind. And it's not a normal wind. There was an incident where someone was inside the old abandoned church that sits there, or it used to sit there at the Stull Cemetery. So they're inside a building, and this wind comes up, and it's so powerful that it actually knocks the person down. And they said it was several minutes before they could even get up because it was just like holding them, almost like a mini hurricane, just holding them down against the floor. And of course, as soon as the wind let up, they jumped up and ran out of the building. And people in the graveyard, back when the church building was still there, people in the graveyard would also sometimes see someone looking at them from the window of the church. And it's not what the face that they see looking out of that window is not a human face, or at least it's not entirely a human face. People have said that they think it might be the ghost of the child, was supposedly the son of a witch and the devil. So I mean, yeah, I don't know about you, but if there's anything worse than just a normal ghost, it's like creepy baby demon ghosts.
Yeah, that'd be even creepier.
It pretty much doesn't get worse than that. Now, those who were brave enough to enter the church, because there used to be an old abandoned church there. It has since been demolished. And even the demolishing of the church is kind of mysterious because the owner of the property didn't want it to be demolished. It's just one morning they woke up and it was rubble. Back when the church still existed, people would describe going inside the church, and it was dilapidated. It was a big mess. There was graffiti on the walls. The roof had been torn off at one point. Parts of it were crumbling. And there was still this old cross hanging up on the wall. And sometimes people there late at night, especially around midnight, said that they would see that cross turn upside down. I think if I saw that, I would be out of there.
Oh, I can't even imagine seeing that. So creepy.
Now, as we mentioned before, the worst place is right next to the church, and it is supposedly a staircase that goes underground. And so supposedly if you walk down the stairs, if you get far enough down the stairs, you will feel the hands grabbing onto you and starting to pull you further down. I can't imagine anything scarier than that.
Nope. Just don't go to the stairs.
Now, supposedly, and I'm not sure who has experienced this, but supposedly people who have been dragged down there, if they come back up, and maybe it's not even going all the way down, maybe it's just going part ways down the stairs, but supposedly it starts to mess with time because people who go down the stairs, they come back up and they think they've only been down there for a few minutes, and hours or maybe even days have passed. So again, that's another thing that's more common with UFOs than it is with haunted places, is memory loss and the loss of time. And that may be the two of the same thing again. But either way, that's one of the things about this that really bothers me. Now there are so many rumors about why Stull, in all of the world, why would the attention of the devil be drawn to this teeny tiny little town in Kansas? What is it about Stull that seems to have drawn his attention? According to one of the stories, it's because the mayor of Stull, or somebody who was thought of as the mayor of Stull, was once stabbed inside that church back in the 1850s. And that's when all of this seems to have started. Stull seems to have been a fairly normal, a small but normal place prior to the 1850s. And then supposedly this murder happened then, and somehow that opened the supernatural floodgates. There's also another story that says that there was a boy that was accidentally burned to death by his father in the early 1900s. There's another incident where a man was supposedly hanged there as well. So it could be that, and it could be that all of those are true. It could just be this, and it could be that those are not the cause of it. It could be something else that happened there that we just don't know about, and that all of these bad things started happening because the cemetery itself or Stull had somehow gone bad.
Yeah. Which one of those do you think is the most likely?
You know, I tend, if I had to pick one, I would probably go with the murder of the man who is considered to be the mayor of Stull. Now, technically, Stull never had a mayor, but there are places where you have little towns, and sometimes the title of mayor can be an unofficial one. It's not necessarily
Hmm.
the actual mayor. It could just be the guy who's sort of looked up to as the head of the community. But supposedly there was a murder there in the 1850s, and that is when all of this began.
Oh. So do you think, because you know a lot more about this than I do, if that is what happened, is it possible for him to cause all of these things that happen? Like, what causes the grabbing sensation and the cars moving and the crosses turning upside down?
Well, things, it depends on, I think of their degrees. So if you're talking about the grabbing sensation or you're talking about weird noises, even if you're talking about the wind, maybe, those are things that you can find in other haunted places. So none of those would strike me as being out of the ordinary. But when you start talking about memory loss and a sense of a loss of time, that is a whole different level of scary than what you get in any other haunted place. So that would really make Stull unique. Plus, not many places have this amount of folklore attached to it.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Stull has a lot of legend and folklore associated with it. I mean, there are a lot of haunted places in the United States. There's not very many where hundreds of people would gather on one night of the year to see what was going to happen there. So that, especially, a place that's kind of off by itself like Stull. So
Hmm.
that is really unique.
Now, I know you've been to a lot of haunted places, and you said that it's really uncommon to hear about memory loss. Have you ever felt that sensation before when you visited a place?
No, I'm not particularly sensitive. I always tell people that ghost encounters tend to have three components. You have to have the right person at the right place at the right time. Different people have different levels of sensitivity to all of this. And so I myself am not a particularly sensitive person. So I can go visit a lot of these places and I won't have an adverse reaction to it. You literally have to put me alone inside a place like the old city jail. Probably if you left me alone inside of Stull Cemetery, I would have something weird that happen there. But for the most part, You have to have someone who's pretty sensitive to this stuff. You have to have them in the right place, and they have to be there at the exact right time for something to happen.
Wow. Well, let's get you there and see what happens.
All right.
So, the Stull Church was only in use for 65 years before it was left vacant in 1922. Now, I find that really interesting because this is a really small town. Why would you build a church only to vacate it 65 years later?
Yeah, that does seem to be a bit strange. Now I know they have a new church across the street from it,
Hmm.
but yeah, maybe they know something we don't.
Yeah, I mean, then they will not talk to people.
Which just increases, and interestingly enough, it's one of those situations where they want to have all of this go away, so they don't talk to anyone about it. But the fact that they don't talk about it makes it that much more mysterious, which means it just keeps going on forever.
Exactly. If they would just talk to people, and then I think people would leave it alone. But they don't, and like you said, that just increases suspicions, and then people really want the answers, and they just won't stop.
No, legends like this are, rarely die off.
And like Mike said earlier, as the years went by, the church fell apart. It was deteriorating. There was vandalism inside. And by 1996, the roof had finally officially blown off. And the pine tree that Mike described earlier, the one that grew up through the headstone and that the witches supposedly danced around, and it was also used as gallows, that was cut down on the day before Halloween in 1998. And to this day, no one knows for sure who cut it down. I mean, someone knows, but they're not telling. And as Mike also described earlier, in March of 2002, a random person tore the Stull church down. Like, even the owner of the property didn't know it was going to be torn down. And the cemetery still remains off North 1600 Road, but beware. It is said that after the church was destroyed, the spirits became angry and took over the cemetery. Whew. It is a creepy place. I feel bad that I didn't know about it growing up. I lived right by it. I don't usually get scared when I read about this kind of stuff. I mean, it is creepy, but after reading about, the stairs and all these things that people encounter, I'm like, ugh, I'm kind of scared to drive through it again.
Can you imagine when you were a kid, if you knew all of these stories about devils and witches and staircases, and you had to drive by that with your parents? I mean, can you imagine how terrified you would have been?
Yeah, maybe that's why my parents didn't tell me.
I mean, I think I would have been just like traumatized just having to go by it.
Do you think the Stoll Church is an actual doorway to hell?
There are a number of locations that have names like that. And do I think that if you go down the stairs, there's fire and brimstone or something like that? No. But is it possible that there is something really dark and malevolent there? Absolutely. And what the whole idea that people go there and sometimes they don't remember what happened to them. That is just really scary. I think that's scarier than thinking about, a horned devil and fire and brimstone. It's so mysterious. There's a part of this that we don't know about. And I think that's really interesting and really creepy.
I agree, because not only have you heard all these legends, but what has happened to people that they can't remember?
Right.
So I know you said earlier that you'd love to visit the cemetery and where the church used to stand. Do you think you would spend the night alone there like you did at the jail?
Absolutely.
We should get you here. Let's get a GoFundMe started to send Mike to Kansas City, and then I'll pick him up and drive him to the cemetery and just drop him off. See what happens.
Well, we'll need the GoFundMe for the bail money when we get arrested for trespassing.
That's true. Yeah, we'll add some extra on there to see what happens. So, do you have any final thoughts on the Stull Cemetery?
Well, I just want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this because it was a fascinating place to research. I knew Stull Cemetery, I knew of it, I knew it was haunted, but I never before had the opportunity to get into some of the details of it. And it was a really interesting and creepy place to research. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of this episode.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited that you said yes, and I feel like I'm talking to a celebrity because you're the Mike Brown. It's so nice to be able to talk this kind of legend with you, and you've really helped explain things to me because, I can read about it, but I wasn't quite sure, how common the occurrences were. I had no idea that memory loss was something that isn't common with haunted places. So that makes it even more creepy to me now.
No, you have something unique there at Stull.
I'm going to be avoiding that route to Lawrence whenever I go. And before we go, I just wanted to talk about the show Supernatural. So I've actually never seen the show, but I did know that they talked about Stull Cemetery in the season 5 finale. And as I looked more into it, it looks like the creator of the show made the two main characters be from Lawrence, Kansas, because it's right outside of Stull, and the creator loves the legend of Stull. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, one of the things about Supernatural is that they do incorporate a lot of sort of real life paranormal incidents and legends and folklore. So I think that's kind of a neat aspect of the show, is that they managed to weave, folklore from real life, things, for example, like the history of Stull Cemetery into their show. I enjoy that aspect of it.
Yeah, I haven't watched it, but I am curious now that they've covered places in my home state. So, to end the episode, would you like to play a quick road trip game?
Sure.
All right. I just have a couple trivia questions.
Well, I'm no good at trivia, but I'll give it my best shot.
All right, we'll see how you do. You can't do worse than Lainey did on the episode I just recorded with her. All right, so we've talked about the gates of hell in this episode, and the 7 gates of hell are said to be located in what Pennsylvania city? Is it York, Philadelphia, or Lancaster?
I'm gonna guess York.
You're correct.
Oh.
So you're such a hustler. You're like, I'm not good at trivia, and then right out of the gate, correct.
Oh, see, yeah, but you've jinxed me now.
Sorry. You're really bad at trivia. Have you been to any of the gates of hell, the supposed gates of hell?
Not yet, but they're on my list.
Great. Well, you live in Charleston, and like you said earlier, I can imagine that you've got enough places there that you don't need to travel outside of it.
Yeah, Charleston has a lot of stories, but I love going other places and learning their stories as well.
Hmm. I'm excited to go to Charleston after CrimeCon and take a ghost tour from you. We're all talking about it and how exciting it is.
I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it.
Maybe we should rent like a limo and we can just drive around and you can put your head out the top of the sunroof and just direct us places.
Well, that would be epic. I've never done a ghost tour from a limo before.
Well, let's do it. All right. In approximately what year did Americans start burying their dead in actual cemeteries or churchyards, things like that? Is it around 1820, 1830, or 1840?
1830?
Yep, you're right.
Oh.
I think so. What I read was that we always, not always, but we buried our dead. We just didn't have like a common place where we decided, like, this plot of land is where we're going to start burying people. So it was around 1831 where we decided to designate plots of land to bury people. In what Massachusetts city was the first American cemetery built? Was it Cambridge, Salem, or Boston?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm gonna guess Boston.
I'm sorry, it's Cambridge.
Oh. My second guess was Salem, so I was never gonna get that one.
That's okay. I tried to add, like, I was like, oh, I'll add Salem to throw him off because I'm mean. All right, to end the road trip game, we're going to play 3 rounds of true or false. I'm going to ask you, is this a way to not necessarily bury the dead, but to memorialize the dead? True or false? You can take the ashes or hair of a loved one and you can make it into a diamond, and this is called a memorial diamond.
I'm gonna guess false.
It's true, you can actually do that.
Oh.
Would you like to be made into a diamond?
I don't really care. What I know I do actually. I think I would prefer just to be buried. My goal is I want to haunt a ghost tour after I die. I want to be like a ghost story, have like a ghost story about me. That's my goal.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I want to be buried somewhere where there's a ghost tour.
All right. Well, you better put that in your will.
Yes.
Okay, true or false? You can launch ashes into space via a rocket, and this is called a space burial.
True.
You're right, you can actually do that. I think that's pretty cool.
I'm guessing that's super expensive.
Oh, I'm sure, but also, what if you get just like a really crappy rocket and the ashes don't make it all the way up, and then you just kind of only go up a couple feet? Like, how sad would that be? And then the last one, true or false? You can dissolve a body in strong solvent, and this way to sort of bury the dead is called dissolution.
True.
You're right. It is true. What a terrible way to go.
Well, that's the H.H. Holmes way, isn't it?
Right, yeah, and that's, I know Walter White did that in Breaking Bad.
Yes, yes.
It just seems like such a smelly, gross way to go.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
I feel bad for the person that has to do that job.
And they're probably just whatever. I'm going to listen to my podcast just another day.
They're listening to Pleasing Terrors as they're dissolving bodies. Well, thanks again for coming along for the ride, Mike. I had so much fun with you.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a real pleasure.
Yeah. Until next time, please remember to check your back seats, and I'll see you at the next rest stop. Thank you to content editor Laura Taylor for making my research sound coherent. If you didn't already know, you can also listen to me on the We're All Just Pretending podcast, where I give bad advice on purpose. And you can also find me on the Creep episode of Playlist that came out this week. You can find Murder Road Trip at murderroadtrip.com, on Instagram and Twitter at murdertrip, and on Facebook at MRT Podcast. If you're interested in continuing the discussion, you can join the Murder Road Trip podcast group on Facebook. Make sure to check out the Murder Road Trip playlist on Spotify. You can even add songs to the playlist. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast app of choice. If you'd like to listen to the episodes before everyone else, listen to bonus content, and get exclusive merchandise, you can check out Murder Road Trip on Patreon. September's bonus episode covered Johnny Millist, and October's bonus episode covered the pizza bomber. Please stay tuned after the music to hear from some other great podcasts.
Welcome to Death Store Podcast, a podcast that explores some of the most haunting cases from America's death row. I'm the host, Dominique Mix, and I hope you'll join me weekly as I explore cases of the innocent and guilty, the executed and the exonerated, all of whom have one thing in common. They all know what it's like to look through the bars of a cell on death row. From the crime to the case's conclusion, I explore evidence, corruption, characters, and, of course, the crime itself. You can find the show on the Acast app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or the podcast app of your choice. I hope you'll join in, and in the meantime, don't forget to hold your loved ones tight.
I'm Casey.
And I'm Samantha.
And we're the hosts of True Crime Storytime, a podcast for all things true crime.
We will be bringing you fortnightly episodes covering everything from murder and mysteries, disappearances, theft and fraud,
Abductions and kidnappings, and more importantly, trying to take a lesson away from each case, because every story has a message.